Welcome to a new video lesson. In today's lesson, I will analyze some of the chapters of Pride and Prejudice. So, let's begin. Today, we will begin with chapter 29 of Pride and Prejudice. In chapter 29, Mr. Collins is elated at the invitation that he has got and spends hours instructing the guests on what to expect at Rosings, so that the grandeur of the place will not overpower them. They arrive at Rosings and are introduced to Lady Catherine, her daughter, and Mrs. Jenkinson. The former receives them with condescension. She is a large woman with strong marked features and an authoritative way of speaking. Her daughter is small and insignificant looking and speaks very little in a low voice, and then only to Mrs. Jenkinson, who listens intently to her, fussing all the while over her comfort. The dinner is good, and Mr. Collins and Sir William praise. Sir William means Charlotte's father. Sir William praised it fulsomely. Lady Catherine seems gratified by their excessive admiration. Mrs. Jenkinson is chiefly employed in pressing Miss Debog to eat. At the dinner, we see all these things. After the dinner, Lady Catherine talks for some time. She advises Charlotte about how to manage her home, her cows, and her poultry. It is easy to see that she takes great pleasure in indicating to others or advising others. She asks Elizabeth a great many questions about her family, many of which the latter considers impertinent. Elizabeth stands up to Lady Catherine, who seems astonished at having her questions poured. After several games of cards, Lady Catherine indicates that the evening is over. So, in this chapter, what we see here is that this chapter mainly concerned with Lady Catherine Debog, about whom we are informed beforehand through the nature of Mr. Collins, through his letters and through his behaviors and his servility towards her. She has a domineering personality. She has apparently subdued everyone she has met. Elizabeth speaks back to Lady Catherine, and this surprises the great lady, as she has never been spoken to in such way. This suggests Elizabeth's own sense of personal worth. She functions as an individual capable of standing up to her own convictions. Just because her social position is lesser, she does not allow herself to be treated as an inferior. What the readers can understand from this, that the most disgusting trait of Lady Catherine's personality is her obsession with self-importance. She treats everyone else as an inferior and is very interfering, wanting to advise everyone on everything. In her demeanour, she betrays as much ill breeding as Mrs. Bennet. Lady Catherine, in character development, Lady Catherine Debog belongs to the class of characters like Mary Bennet, who are caricatures. In them, Jane Austen has abstracted a particular defect and exaggerated it to draw the pointed attention of the readers to it. So Lady Catherine, first of all, is a snob. Most importantly, she is a snob. Her snobbery is mainly based on rank and wealth, okay, which she possesses, whereas the foolishness of Mary is based on her fancied literary achievement. Both excite the same concept or the contempt which is tested in the light of common sense. The pompous lady is introduced to us, the readers, long before she marks her physical appearance in the novel. Her devotee, or moreover a servant, Mr. Collins, takes care to mention her in his first letter to the Bennets, okay, before he arrives there. As I have mentioned before also, he is in all praise for her for favoring him with the rectory in her parish, and declares that he considers himself duty bound to show all deference to her ladyship. The letter throws as much light on the character of the Lady Catherine as on the writer himself, that is Mr. Collins. Okay, so both Mr. Bennet and Elizabeth are struck by the servility towards the lady. The impression created by the lady is naturally that she must be an august personage. The account given on her by Mr. Collins in person is more awe-striking. If Elizabeth and her father had not been shrewd judges of character, they would have formed quite a wrong idea of the redoubtable old woman. As it is, the others are kept in awe by what they hear of Lady Catherine from the glowing account of Rosings given by Mr. Collins, that Mr. Phillipses would not have resented a comparison between her dining room and the servants' quarters of Lady Catherine. Jane Austen takes care that the reader is not infected with the enthusiasm of the clergyman. Okay, she makes it clear that all the glory of Lady Catherine is derived through a sort of reflection from her blind worshipper. When they meet for the first time, Elizabeth is not in the least disappointed in her expectation of Lady Catherine. When she pays a visit to Hunsford Parsonage for the sake of Charlotte, Mr. Collins prophesies the entire party would be invited by her ladyship within a short time. When the invitation comes, as I discussed a few moments before, when the invitation comes, he is uncontrollable. Okay, he is unable to control his joy. He describes the ladyship as the pink of courtesy and graciousness, and is itching to make Elizabeth realize what she had lost by rejecting his hand. Okay, but the interesting point that can be made here is that Sir William Lucas and his second daughter are terrified at the prospect of being introduced to such personage by the time they reach Rosings. In fact, it can be said that Sir William is unable to speak in her ladyship's presence, and Maria is unable to even sit properly on the chair. Okay, it is only Elizabeth who is able to keep her presence of mind. Lady Catherine behaves exactly as Elizabeth expected her to do. There is an air of offensive condescension in her words and behavior. She gives unsolicited advice to Charlotte about running the household. Every word spoken by her is used to make others feel that she is inferior to the speaker. Okay, She is equally impertinent to Elizabeth, with whom she has no right to take any liberty. She makes elaborate inquiries about the age and family of Elizabeth and gives the benefit of her advice to her too. Elizabeth is shocked at this, and Lady Catherine is shocked too that she and her sister should have been brought up without a governess. Okay, and boasts about the help rendered by her to numerous families by providing suitable governess for them. Elizabeth does not give her direct replies, and Lady Catherine is a little annoyed due to the boldness that Elizabeth showed her. For Elizabeth was the first person, and I quote, who had ever dared to trifle with such dignified impertinence. Okay, so Lady Catherine thinks that Elizabeth is impertinent. It is with the greatest difficulty that the latter is able to control her temper, and for the sake of Charlotte, Elizabeth cools down. Elizabeth also discovers that Lady Catherine adopts the same attitudes towards Darcy and Fitzwilliam too. Okay, we will come to that later. So what we see here is that the pompousness is the main characteristics. The attitude, the pride is devoted due to his wealth, due to her wealth. Okay. Sir William, in chapter 30, it mentions that Sir William returns home after a week, but Elizabeth and Maria stay on with the Collins. Elizabeth has the opportunity to observe the interfering ways of Lady Catherine, who rules the parish with a rod of iron. Mr. Collins keeps her informed concerning the parishioners, and she frequently visits cottages to criticize and scold them. Easter is approaching, and Mr. Darcy is expected at Rosings. Mr. Collins sees his carriage arriving and hastens to inform the parsonage. The following morning he hurries to pay his respects to Mr. Darcy, and Darcy has brought his cousin Colonel Fitzwilliam, and when Collins returns home, the two gentlemen are with them. Darcy asks Elizabeth about her family. She tells him that Jane is in London, and he looks confused, saying that he has not been fortunate enough to meet her there. Shortly afterwards, the gentlemen return to Rosings. So, do you see here? So, it becomes clear, quite evidently clear, that the letters that Jane has written to the Bingley sisters are not informed. The information is not informed by Bingley sisters to either Darcy or to Mr. Bingley. Okay, so what we see here is that though Darcy had been filled with pride, though Darcy had been pompous in his own extent, he has mellowed down. And in this chapter, this is an important plot event, since it brings Elizabeth in contrast with Darcy again. In this chapter, we will see that Darcy has somewhat changed from previous instance. Some sort of peace between them can be hoped from the way they are talking. This is incidental one of the few times that Jane Austen resorts to coincidence in the novel. The coincidence of Darcy's arrival at the very time that Elizabeth is visiting is not outrageous. However, Lady Catherine is as unusually interfering and manages the lives of most of our parishioners. Okay, as I said before, Lady Catherine has the attitude of advising everyone. So this is same in the case of Darcy and Fitzwilliam, though she uses a modified form towards them, or towards Darcy. Of course, she does not behave in the attitude of a patroness, but she tries to be his guide and philosopher. She considers herself to be an authority on every question and cannot bear to be left out of any discussion. She must know what is going on when Elizabeth and Colonel Fitzwilliam are talking by themselves, as it will be seen, and it can be seen in the next chapter, that is 31. So they resent her interference, but she proceeds to give her views on music. She tells in the manner of an oracle that none can play on the piano without practice, and asks Darcy to make a special mention of her advice in his letters to his sister. She advises Elizabeth also to practice and is generous enough to allow her to come to Rosings as often as she likes to play on the piano in the housekeeper's room, since she will not be in anybody's way there. Okay, this is the height of ill breeding, and this leads Darcy to be ashamed of her. He tells her curtly that his sister does not need such advice, and that she does practice constantly. Even after this retort, Lady Catherine does not choose to keep her opinions on music to herself. So all this officious impertinence proceeds out of her belief that she is Lady Bountiful in the place. She plays patronage not only to Collins but also to the entire locality. Okay, so this chapter shows almost coming together, or a second chance for Darcy and Elizabeth to reunite and to forget or to try to solve the misunderstandings that has happened between them, and this thing will be most importantly be solved by Colonel Fitzwilliam, who would be there, who would be a prime factor in solving the problems between them. Okay, chapter 31, here the mention of Colonel Fitzwilliam is given. Colonel Fitzwilliam is about 30 years old, and though not good looking, has pleasing manners, is liked by the personage. A week after the arrival of the nephews, Lady Catherine invites the personage party to visit her on Sunday evening. Fitzwilliam is attracted by Elizabeth and entertains her, while Darcy keeps looking towards them, and Lady Catherine keeps calling out questions to them, as I have said just now. Elizabeth plays the piano at Fitzwilliam's request, and Darcy stands by the piano, disgusted by the aunt's rudeness in talking with Elizabeth while Elizabeth is performing. Elizabeth cannot discern any signs that Darcy is in love with his cousin, the sickly Miss Debog. Okay, but also what we see here is that she can not also see the fact that Darcy is already totally in love with Elizabeth. Okay, the chapter presents the character of Colonel Fitzwilliam and emphasizes the contrast between him and Darcy. Elizabeth and Colonel Fitzwilliam seem to get along exceptionally well, Now it is Elizabeth who shines while Darcy observes, and now it is Darcy's relative, Lady Catherine, who embarrasses everyone with her chatter and character. Okay, so the coin has now flipped to the other side. On similar occasion, on similar outing or meeting, Mrs. Bennet's behavior was an embarrassment for Elizabeth, and as we will know later in the novel, that it was also a reason behind Elizabeth's elder sister being rejected. Okay, so now the coin has flipped, and now Darcy is ashamed of the situation that has happened due to Lady Catherine de Bourgh. This is a slight movement towards each other, as Darcy and she agree that neither of us perform to strangers. They are indeed well mated, but they have yet to acknowledge their love for one another or realize their love for one another. Okay, Colonel Fitzwilliam is one of the minor characters. Still, he has an important role to play. He has an informed mind, is pleasant looking like Wickham, but is far superior in character. At the same time, his breezy and sanguine openness is contrast to Darcy's reserved nature. The importance of Colonel Fitzwilliam is in the fact that he will inform the truth about Wickham, okay, and portray the real character of Darcy and what has happened in between Wickham and Darcy. Okay, Lady Catherine, by her embarrassing comments on allowing Elizabeth to use the servants' room to practice the piano, more often shows Darcy that ill breeding is to be seen as frequent among the higher classes also as among the lower classes, and helps him get over his prejudice. Okay, as it is his prejudice that has forced or manipulated him to advise Bingley to reject or to move away from Jane. Okay, so the prejudice of Darcy towards Elizabeth's family is now almost nullified. Clear? Let's move on to chapter 32. The following morning, Elizabeth is found sitting alone writing to Jane when, to a surprise, Darcy enters the room. The rest of the party is out, so Elizabeth talks to him about the Bingleys and hears that Mr. Bingley may sell Netherfield Park. Okay, Darcy does not have much to say, and he leaves shortly after Charlotte returns. The latter informs Elizabeth of a suspicion that Darcy is in love with her friend from Longbourn. Elizabeth laughs at the idea. After this, Darcy comes often to the personage, sometimes alone, sometimes with Fitzwilliam. He looks at Elizabeth a great deal but speaks very little. Okay, so the emotions that he has already developed for Elizabeth, but is unable to express them. Elizabeth, on the other hand, continues to be blind to the best qualities of Darcy. He in turn is obviously falling in love with her. Okay, even Charlotte begins to note that Darcy is attracted to Elizabeth. In fact, it becomes quite apparent, except to Elizabeth, that Darcy is in love with Elizabeth. Okay, the main clue to his turn of feelings is a sudden outburst. You can't have been always at Longbourn. This is his view. She impresses him as possessing an incredible fine nature for all the limitations of her rural upbringing. It is through Colonel Fitzwilliam that Elizabeth is gradually getting her perspective about Wickham into better focus. Chapter 33 describes Elizabeth rambling in the park, often encounters Mr. Darcy unexpectedly. Okay, he walks with her on these occasions, and she notices that he asks her questions about her dislikes and likes. One day she meets Fitzwilliam in the park, and he walks towards the parsonage with her. They speak of Darcy, and Colonel tells Elizabeth that Darcy has recently saved a friend from an imprudent marriage. Fitzwilliam tells Elizabeth that he suspects that this friend is Bingley. Elizabeth is hurt and indignant at the slight of Jane. If this is the case, she broods in her room and pleads a headache. And so that the others do not go to tea at Rosings without her. Okay. Here, Fitzwilliam confirms Elizabeth's feeling that the major responsibility in Bingley's removal from Netherfield rests with Darcy. Wickham's, that is Fitzwilliam, information further alienates Darcy from Elizabeth, who is already much prejudiced against him. She holds him mainly responsible for Jane's misfortune. It is particularly his proud contempt for a girl from a lower class, a girl with one uncle who was a country attorney and another who was in business, that Elizabeth resents. Okay, so the impression is made worse when she meets him and his cousin Fitzwilliam at Rosings. There indeed she finds a little change in him. He is politer than he was, that is, Darcy is politer than he was, though she discovers the same reserved attitude. But his exterior character, okay, is put in worse light than ever when Colonel Fitzwilliam alludes to a certain friend about whom Darcy has saved him from an imprudent marriage. Elizabeth is able to understand who it is Darcy is. The dislike for Darcy is turned into positive hatred for the man and who had injured the tenderest of hearts. It is during this moment, as ill luck would have it, that Darcy proposes her. Okay, and it is not a surprise, therefore, that he is rejected haughtily by Elizabeth. Okay, this is in chapter 34. When the others go to Rosings, Elizabeth sits reading Jane's letter. Suddenly there is a ring and Darcy is admitted. He appears agitated and suddenly declares his love for Elizabeth. Okay, so the love for Jane of Elizabeth is already hurt, because the love between Jane and Bingley has been hampered by Darcy. Okay, so Elizabeth is hurt that Jane's marriage or Jane's prospective relationship with Bingley is hampered. So, as she is close to Jane, as they bonded well, she is clearly hurt with Darcy's behavior. Um, he appears agitated, and after he declares his love, um, we see that Elizabeth is dumbfounded. Darcy speaks eloquently about his pride, making it clear that he knows that Elizabeth is his social inferior and that it is against his better self that he loves her. Whatever compassion Elizabeth feels for him on account of her impending refusal of his offer is lost in resentment. He sees that he has no doubt in receiving a favorable answer from her, and he turns pale with anger when she rejects him. Elizabeth blames him for separating Jane from Bingley. Darcy admits this and says he rejoices in his success in the matter. Elizabeth upbraids him with his treatment of Wickham. Darcy, on this account, refutes this and quits the house after Elizabeth has told him that under no circumstances would she ever consider marrying him. Okay, this chapter 34, marks an important step in the Darcy Elizabeth relationship. It has been complex, it has turned complex to the highest point. Here Darcy makes a proposal of marriage to Elizabeth. The first proposal of Darcy is catastrophic as it occurs at the wrong moment. The discovery of Darcy's role in the split between Bingley and Jane makes Elizabeth smolder with resentment against him, and just when she hates him the most, Darcy reveals his love for her. Okay, so the proposal is as awkward and insensible as the earlier one made by Mr. Collins. Darcy is full of pride, and rather than emphasizing his love, constantly refers to the struggles and obstacles which he has had to overcome in order to make himself take this step. So it is all about himself, all the problems that he has to undergo in loving a low class girl, okay, financially low. But there is very, very less amount of emphasization on the amount of love he does to Elizabeth. He tells Elizabeth that he likes her against his reason and character. It is no wonder that Elizabeth is more offended than enamored by such a proposal, and so she rejects it outright in a frank and direct manner. She tells him, and I quote, "I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I would ever be prevailed on to marry," unquote. Okay, almost irony, because we know that they will be betrothed, they will get married, they have the proposition to get married by the end of the chapter, by the end of the novel. But here the complication has attained to such a high extent that till this point, from this point, it is very, very hard to turn back, very, very hard to understand what is going to happen. The next step, it is Elizabeth discovers even at the time of his habitual pride, he admits before her that he had been struggling against his love for her, but could not control himself anymore. He is surprised and angry when she rejects his hand. what we see here is that for Darcy, his aristocratic pride is revealed at its worst at this moment. Okay, he tells her later that he had never for a moment doubted that his offer would be gratefully accepted. The same pride is revealed by him in his letter of defense also. He does not deny his part played in Jane Bingley love affair in separating them. Even earlier he had told that he had been kinder towards his friend than towards himself in the matter. He had said also that he had been perfectly in the right to save what can you say, right, to have looked down upon the relatives of Elizabeth and to save his friend. The same sentiments are practically repeated in the letter in the next chapter. The next chapter, chapter 35, is very, very important. Okay, so Elizabeth grows furious after reading the letter. There is pride in his justification of his attitude to Wickham. Also, though, there is nothing in it to anger Elizabeth. We will deal with chapter 35 in the next class. But up till now, what we see here is that if we look at from Elizabeth's perspective, she is not wrong in taking him to be proud, but this impression makes her blind to all his good qualities. She accuses him of want of manners and charges him openly with ill treatment of Wickham and malicious interference in his sister's affairs. She fails to appreciate that Darcy is frank, if nothing else, in speaking out his reasons for loving her. Okay, she burns with anger when he refers to the want of manners of her relatives, and the letter of defense that he writes, that Darcy writes, to increase her anger at first. So the prejudice is she does not believe even the defense of himself regarding his treatment of Wickham. It is indeed surprising that such an intelligent woman would be blind to the real character of Darcy as well as Wickham. This is because of her blind admiration for Wickham and the equally blind dislike for the other. It is only after reading Darcy's letter many a time that her good sense asserts to itself. So what we see here is that the title has been very aptly ingrained in the character, or the character traits formed the title, whichever way we would like to see. So what we see here is that we are ending this chapter, we are ending this video lesson at a point where the tension is at the highest state, where Elizabeth is thoroughly pissed off with Darcy's behavior. Though Darcy is totally in love with Elizabeth, but what we find here is that Elizabeth is not willing a bit to tolerate Darcy. Number one, because of his pride. Next, because of his involvement in separating Jane and Bingley. Thirdly, we can say his treatment of Wickham. So what we see here is that Elizabeth is the most biased person. Obviously, Darcy has his weaknesses. Darcy has done his wrong judgment, or Darcy has done it wrong when he has separated Jane and Bingley by considering in the behavior of their mother. But what we see here is that the prospect of them getting along is very bleak, but as they are the protagonist of the story, uh, we know that they will get along. Let's see how they do that. Okay, thank you.